Can you beat Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild back to back in under 1 hour? This is the question I asked myself after learning the Tears of the Kingdom any % speedrun, and in the process of learning the Breath of the Wild any % speedrun. The current any % world record for Breath of the Wild is 23 minutes and 23 seconds by player 5, and the Tears of the Kingdom any % world record is 40 minutes and 57 seconds, also by player 5. So right now, even if you played perfectly at a world record level, sub 1 hour is still around 4 minutes away. So what's the problem? Let's first take a look at Breath of the Wild. This game has been out in speedrun for over 7 years at this point, and for the most part, the vast majority of the any % time save has been found. Without some entirely new game-changing glitch, wringing out another 4 minutes of time save from this game would not be easy. To demonstrate this, let's visualize the Breath of the Wild speedrun. This run is divided into 2 key parts, the Great Plateau and the endgame castle segment. This ends up being a very balanced ratio, as the routing for this category has gotten. But we can take a closer look, starting with the Great Plateau. The Great Plateau in an any % speedrun is an excellent example of how far this game has been pushed. Through the use of 2 clipping glitches, scope clip in the case of the Shrine of Resurrection, and shield clipping for the rest of the plateau shrines, the majority of the dead space and routing inconveniences are avoided. We can avoid triggering the opening cutscene and avoid raising the plateau tower. This does more than just skip cutscenes though, as it allows the plateau route itself to be about as optimized as possible. The primary equipment on the plateau, the Boko Spear and Pot Lid, are grabbed after clipping out of the Shrine of Resurrection, which conveniently are also on the way to the bow in the Temple of Time, which is conveniently right next to arrows and pots that can be used to perform one of the primary movement techniques, the Bow Lift Smuggle Slide, in order to get to the first shrine containing bombs. This opens up the use of another technique, wind bombing, which can be used to trivialize every other shrine. This is just a small example, but shows how precise the routing for Breath of the Wild has gotten. This goes for the endgame too, where we BLSS to the castle, and spend a bit of time to collect weapons we need in order to complete the endgame boss rush in under 10 minutes. So, thanks to hundreds of hours of work and community effort put in by the Breath of the Wild speedrunning community, it seems unlikely that we'd be able to find another 4 minutes of time save without something completely new. But what about Tears of the Kingdom? If we break down the any % run like we did with Breath of the Wild, something becomes immediately apparent. For one, the first 5.5 minutes of the game are dedicated to the intro. This section is about as fast as it can get, as the parts that we have control of already have a time save, known as intro clip, which allows you to skip several of Zelda's dialogue sequences. This is unfortunately immediately followed up by a 4-minute unskippable cutscene. The next 22 minutes of the run are dedicated entirely to the Great Sky Island, Tears of the Kingdom's equivalent to the Great Plateau. The last 13 minutes is the endgame, where we travel from the Great Sky Island to the castle, where we very quickly clip in and blow through the final boss rush. If we compare these visualizations of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom's any % runs, something very apparent stands out. The vast majority of the Tears of the Kingdom speedrun lies within the Great Sky Island. In fact, the time it takes to beat the Great Sky Island from the end of the intro is about as long as the entirety of the Breath of the Wild any % speedrun. So what's going on here? Remember earlier when I brought attention to Breath of the Wild being able to avoid a couple of the routing inconsistencies on the Great Plateau? Tears of the Kingdom so far has not been so lucky. The first of these inconveniences is the title card cutscene. In Breath of the Wild, when you typically exit the Shrine of Resurrection for the first time, you get a fairly long title card cutscene. This is the same for Tears of the Kingdom whenever you leap off the island containing the Room of Awakening. Unlike Breath of the Wild, however, there is no known way to skip this cutscene. Regardless of where you jump off the island, you are greeted with the nearly 1 minute long unskippable title card cutscene. To make matters worse, regardless of where you jump, the cutscene places you in the same spot at the end, with void triggers surrounding the entire island until you acquire the Pura Pad. We are then greeted with another massive routing problem. Despite the entire Great Sky Island becoming accessible, we have no way of entering any of the 4 shrines without making a trip to the Temple of Time to activate them. In Breath of the Wild, the equivalent problem is raising the tower, which also activates the Great Plateau shrines. As I said earlier, Breath of the Wild can get around this by clipping into shrines. Unfortunately, in Tears of the Kingdom, even if we had a way to clip into the shrines, we cannot actually enter them. You see, in Breath of the Wild, shrines are entered by using the elevator, which is always active. In Tears of the Kingdom, they are entered using a loading zone, which does not exist until the shrine has been activated. So getting into the shrines earlier is kinda dead. But what about skipping them entirely? Typically, when you complete the Great Sky Island, you do so by interacting with the altar behind the Temple of Time after opening the door. Something that might jump out about this is that the altar is actually on the outside of the back of the Temple of Time. So what if we flew on a wing to the back without ever completing a shrine or opening the door? Tragically, Nintendo thought about this, making it so the altar is only interactable after opening the door. If we try to do it before opening the door, nothing happens. So any hope of avoiding any of these inconveniences is pretty bleak, and our only chance of speeding up the Great Sky Island relies on how fast we can complete the required tasks. This has actually been the main focus of routing as of late. Thanks to the discovery of Quick Drop Smuggle a few weeks ago, we can set up Tears of the Kingdom's movement glitch, Arrow Smuggle Flight, and the first shrine we do in the run, the Ascend Shrine. This greatly speeds up the movement between shrines, which is all fine and good. It does help us work towards our goal of speeding up the Great Sky Island. But there's one more thing I've neglected to mention: cutscenes. I'm fully convinced some Nintendo developer accidentally clicked on the Breath of the Wild speedrun world record, thinking it was some guy's casual playthrough, then thought to himself, not enough text. This same developer then placed a floating ghost goat at every single point in the Great Sky Island. Seriously, I cannot overstate how much time is spent in cutscenes or text on this island. This is extremely apparent on the first shrine we do in the speedrun, the Ascend Shrine. Shrine cutscenes in this game can't be skipped until they've been viewed in their entirety once. This means that the Ascend Shrine is around 50 seconds of actual gameplay, and nearly 3 full minutes of text and cutscene. This does get better in the later shrines, but this goat cutscene at the beginning and sometimes end of each shrine is upward to 40 seconds long, which really adds up over the course of the run. I also have neglected to mention the fact that the game actually requires a second trip to the Temple of Time after the third shrine has been completed in order to activate the Recall Shrine. This trip alone takes 3 minutes in the speedrun, where we arrow fly from Ultra Hand to the Temple of Time, open the Temple of Time, activate the altar for recall, talk to him again, then press A on the second door to unlock fast traveling and activate the Recall Shrine. This is really a shame too. The endgame of the 80% run is pretty well optimized, with the only room for improvement potentially being in the traversal time from the Great Sky Island to the castle. Hopefully in the future we find something that lets us break open the Great Sky Island. I believe that it has to be possible someday, through some method we have yet to find. I hope it comes sooner rather than later though. Being able to speedrun Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom back to back in under 1 hour would be a massive accomplishment. But until then, Tears of the Kingdom has a Great Sky Island problem, a 23-minute one. This has been Jake, and thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to click on one of the videos on screen now, and of course, subscribe.